Section 186, the women return to report to the apostles. And we have one question regarding that, question number 1003. Okay, what did Jesus do the second time he met with the women? And this is going to be based on Matthew 28, verses 9 to 10. It says, and as they went to tell his disciples, behold, Jesus met them, saying, all hail. And they came and held him by the feet and worshipped him. Then said Jesus unto them, be not afraid, go tell my brethren that they go into Galilee, and there shall they see me. And so the answer that we should have gotten was, it's A, he reminded them of how they were supposed to go to the disciples as they worshipped at his feet. Okay, and one of the things that you should take notice of here that's different from the previous section was that Jesus had told Mary not to touch him. And there's not in the words in the language that's being used, there's really not a whole lot of difference. This is a kind of different kind of holding that's going on here. That's whatever, but I think this sort of goes against the idea and the consideration that Jesus would be defiled somehow by them touching him, which was covered in the last question, but that it was more a question of holding him back. Quite frankly, the holding him his feet is a little bit of a stronger word than the other one. So the idea is it's not so much a question of what effect this would have by them touching him as much as him just urging them to go along. Okay, so when we look at B, he told them to stop crying, or he rebuked them because they had little faith. Well, the time was past for any crying or rebuke, and they were not crying, and they did not need to be rebuked. Jesus had a mission for the women to attend to. And Matthew jumps quickly to the next moment where the women worshipped at his feet. And so the word for held, as I said, is actually stronger than the reference that John made to Jesus' prohibition to not touch him. It is understandable that in their joy they would want to hold on longer. However, Jesus urged them on to deliver the news to the disciples. Brother Joe.
Yeah, I had either read or somehow came to the idea that it wasn't about being defiled, but Jesus was more or less saying, like, don't cling to me because, like, I've got things that have to be done and you have things that need to be done. So that's kind of what he was saying. Like, it wasn't so much just the touching, but the clinging and, and slowing things down and impeding the progress of what needed to be done.
Right, yes. And I think that's kind of interesting. You would ordinarily think that when somebody passes away that life slows down. I could well imagine that. But Jesus was resurrected, so there was no reason to slow things down now. If anything, it should be a cause for excitement. It's like, oh, well, wait a second. This is not what we thought it was. Well, let's get back into action. We have no time to lose. And so they moved on very quickly. Okay. Section 187. The soldiers are paid to lie about the empty tomb. And so we have question number 1004. Okay, what was the character of the guards over Jesus' tomb? What was it like, their character? And this is Matthew 28, verses 12 to 15 we're using. Matthew 28, verses 12 to 15. And when they were assembled with the elders and had taken counsel, they gave large money unto the soldiers, saying, Say ye, his disciples came by night and stole him away while we slept. And if this come to the governor's ears, we will persuade him and secure you. So they took the money and did as they were taught, and this saying is commonly reported among the Jews until this day. And so the answer is, see, they were greedy enough to lie, willing to risk punishment if it had been true that they let the disciples steal the body. Okay, so now they had the backing of the Jews to support their story, because if they had, in their failing to hold their post and to keep things from happening, they were at risk for judgment themselves. And so they did have this backing, and they were happy to take the money. Okay, for A, they were honorable men who faithfully kept guard. Now, if the soldiers had any honor, they would have resisted the bribe, but they would also have to give account for the missing of the body of Christ. Okay, and so B, they were believers because they witnessed the power of God at the tomb. Well, unfortunately, they missed their opportunity. The heavenly reward that they could have had did not motivate them to deny a lie and take whatever punishment might have been given. And this is also something that goes to the whole issue of the proof of the resurrection, because it's one thing for a fanatic to be able to promote something, something that's a questionable thing or a known lie. They are not likely to do it if there's death that they're threatened to, but fanatics can overcome that for fanaticism's sake, make a martyr of themselves. But if you absolutely know something is a lie, it is not likely that you were willing to risk death for it. And this has been a strong consideration as people have examined things over time. And so for the apostles later on to not just risk death, but submit themselves to death for something that would be something that they had an eyewitness lie about, would not be likely. Brother Joe, yes.
Yeah, I remember listening to an interview with Chuck Colson, and I know Chuck Colson is ecumenical, and we don't support everything that he stands for.
He could be good in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I'm just saying that we don't support everything that he stands for. But anyway, he was talking about, because in case we don't know who that was, he was involved in the Nixon Watergate scandal, and that was something on a much smaller scale. And he was talking about there was an even smaller group of people who were trying to keep the thing together, and he said there's always something that snaps or something that gets somebody who lets something out, or it's really difficult to keep a conspiracy like that under wraps. And he said that was one of the things, I think, that led him to believe that this was that really happened, because he had experienced himself that he and his group couldn't keep something on a much smaller scale, a secret or whatever. So if
a lesser secret at that.
Right, exactly. So that because the crucifixion and the resurrection were on such a much more grand scale, he says there's just really no way that anybody could have kept that a secret. It would have just unraveled at some point and would have been exposed for a hoax if it really hadn't happened. So that was one of the things that really convinced him.
Yeah, I remember that it's the more people that are involved in a conspiracy, the more likely it is going to break.
Exactly. That was the thing. And so many more people just became involved with it, and it never broke down the way it normally would have if it were not true.
Yeah. There are some of these court TV channels that you can watch where they show how somebody who's guilty, how that the person by themselves, how they're with enough time and with enough pressure, they begin to break down. It's like even for a single person to be able to maintain a lie is ridiculously difficult to be able to do. So, yeah. So this speaks to, again, proof of the empty tomb. Okay, in the last section for tonight, 2 questions. Section 188, the women deliver the report, and Peter returns to the tomb. Okay, so question number 1005 is, why did the women's report seem as idle tales? And I'm going to give you the answer because I want to switch it up from what's in the back of the book. The answer is the better answer is B. We were looking at that a little bit earlier this afternoon, and I'm not quite sure from the comments that I had exactly why I might have suggested C. But B is definitely the better answer. And we're going to base that on Luke 24:11, where it says, and their words seemed to them as idle tales, and they believed them not. And Nancy, I did not write down that other scripture. Did you write that down by any chance in your notebook from Matthew?
Well, the reference to mourning and weeping is Mark.
Oh, Mark.
16:10.
Okay, Mark 16:10. Could you don't have a microphone in my Bibles here. Here we go. Mark 16:10, let me read that. Mark 16:10 says, and she went and told them that had been with him as they mourned and wept.
Then the next verse says that they didn't believe.
And they, when they had heard that he was alive and had been seen of her, believed not. Okay, that the question could be there: who was doing the mourning and weeping, the disciples or the women? Okay. Okay, so they were deep in mourning and weeping. So we look at A, Peter and John reported that the tomb was empty, so they thought the body had been stolen. Well, after careful examination of the various visits to the empty tomb, we can see that Peter and John had already been there and gone home when they first heard from Mary. At that time, John 20, verses 2 to 10, there was no reference to Peter's impression. John was being convinced, though. However, there's no indication that Peter and John had said anything to the other disciples about what they had seen. So Peter and John did not necessarily report anything themselves, and they waited for the women to come back with that report. When you look at C, they thought they were just some silly women. Well, the disciples were so far removed from the message of the resurrection, remember, they struggled over trying to figure this out, that they were not receptive to what they had to say. And this is similar to how people think the things described in the Bible are too fantastic, and so they would rather just be dismissive than to take the time to give an honest evaluation of the Bible. But for B, it's interesting that there's no reference to the disciples being in mourning in reaction to the women. People can change their affects so quickly, which makes you wonder at their sincerity of suffering. However, what this really points to is how strong the urge is to be right, that they can so quickly ignore their suffering to take time to argue. We should especially take note of this because their change is so completely out of context with the general time of mourning. And so, so it's not that they were just thinking they were silly, but they were letting their mourning and weeping just confuse things. Question 1006, what did Peter do when he heard the women? And this is going to be based on Luke 24:12. Then arose Peter and ran into the sepulchre, and stooping down, he beheld the linen clothes laid by themselves, and departed, wondering in himself at that which was come to pass. And so the answer is A, yes. He went to look again, and he left bewildered. C, he called them crazy fanatics. Now, Peter had extra reason to not think that the women were telling wild tales about seeing Jesus because he had been to the tomb already. So there would be less reason for him to call them crazy fanatics. He's actually getting some confirmation of what he had seen before. For A, he went to look again and left bewildered. With Mary's further report of seeing Jesus, Peter returned to the tomb and wondered at what all this meant. He rejoiced. Well, Peter's not ready for rejoicing yet. Okay. Keep in mind that Peter has a little bit of extra baggage he's carrying at this time because he had been the one who had been denying Christ 3 times. So for Peter to jump on board with everything, there's some reluctance on his part that would be understandable. He's in a position of not quite knowing what to do, and it shows up that he's not exactly rejoicing. There was going to be some time for him to go through before he's ready to get completely restored in his joy and spiritual engagement. This is something that we should recognize for those who have gone through a time of spiritual suffering, whether they bring it on themselves or not. Keep in mind, sometimes people need a little bit of room to be able to make some adjustment. Now, I don't think people should take that room. I think we should be so practiced at giving in to God that we should be able to bounce back. Typically, when we fall into problems, we want to try to justify ourselves. It's hard for us to admit that we were wrong, which causes us to persist in our error sometimes, or it might something maybe a little bit better. We might be slow to get back on board with serving God, but we should be so practiced at yielding to God that we should jump in right away. We should not let an offense get us down. Now we're human beings. We're going to be responding to things. Maybe something will strike us, and we might be taken aback. But if we are conscientious about our spirituality, we should be continually examining ourselves. Is my reaction the proper reaction? Now, I tried to say that a little bit carefully. Okay. Now, my feeling is not what I'm talking about. We could feel bad about something. Okay, when we stub our toes, it's okay to say ouch, I say. Something happens to you, okay, don't beat yourself up if you feel bad. If your knee-jerk reaction is to feel bad about it, that's not so bad. It's what you do after, that's where the problem lies. Okay. It's kind of like, we actually say this with regard to a lot of temptations. It's one thing to have the temptation, it's another thing to dwell on it. Okay. If you see something that is a temptation, well, you can't help something that flashed in front of your eyes. It's the second look that's the problem. Okay. And in the same way, it's our reaction to our situation. Personally, and I think this is a good thing to do, I try to practice consciousness of being patient. I try to look for things and ask myself, is there something to be patient about here? It's funny, 100% of the time I find something I can be patient about that I should be. Now, and that's me doing that by intellect, not by emotion, not because I feel like it. Okay. It's something that you have to be extremely deliberate about. And if you do that regularly, if you're constantly looking for that, you will be able to be faster at responding to it and saying, yes, I must be patient in this moment. And that patience pays off. That patience pays off. So it doesn't mean that I'm patient all the time. It doesn't mean I'm successful all the time. But that it's that deliberation. That's the issue. So when Peter, he's sort of struggling here. So his lack of giving into it, his lack of buying into it, or I should say, the lack of any mention of it, is not surprising. We should realize that about ourselves too, and we should be constantly asking ourselves, how shall I now deal with this thing that I'm feeling bad about? And I could just about guarantee, if we're feeling bad about something, there is an aspect of being self-centered that's going on. That's a signal. That's a signal to us. Because when you're feeling bad about something, what you're doing is you're thinking about yourself. Okay, and we're not saying that self-centered is necessarily a bad thing in that moment. It's just a factor that you got to take into consideration. And because you do need to think about self sometimes. Like, for instance, when you get up and you make breakfast, you got to think about what you're going to eat. That's thinking about self also, right? Or when you are doing exercise, yeah, you're thinking about self. When you're taking time to relax, you're thinking about self. So I'm not saying thinking about self is necessarily a bad thing, but I'm saying that when we feel bad about something, that is a signal that we're focused on self, and that we need to do something about it. Maybe if you need to take a rest, well, maybe that's the thing you do about it, or maybe if you get over yourself, maybe it's a sinful moment and a temptation to be not loving. That's when it becomes sin. So thinking about self, you can't escape it completely, but when it turns into a temptation to not act in love for somebody else, that's when you get the second clue that there might be a thing going on there. Okay, so yeah, Peter. Definitely thinking about self in that moment.